So friends, we began our welcome question this morning reflecting on where we've seen compassion in this last week, recently, and really kind of asking this question of where have we seen it? So where has there been compassionate action that has been taken? Because acting with compassion is exactly where we're headed today. Because this fall we are embracing the change that we see around us as we press into this Chunk of Change sermon series, but really exploring how God is nudging us, not only through those external changes that we live through, those thresholds that we find ourselves at, but also that invitation to always be changed, heart, mind, soul change also. So listening for those hooks. We're still continuing to pass out those S hooks as you come in the door, so you might have received one. It can just be that little prayer stone for you. The idea is that you can use it then to go and visit our little Kairos wall over there, write down something that God is saying to you and hang that up to name that during our time together today. And we have set aside on this change journey that we're on, this month of October, in the middle of all of it, is really a month where we're focusing on this change, this invitation to become people of deeper compassion. And we began 2 weeks ago also just by defining what compassion is. What is compassion?
Being with suffering.
Thank you for reading. Jason, for paying attention. No. Or to suffer with, we have said. Pro tip, I'm going to keep asking you that question, so kind of remembering that is helpful. So to suffer with, being with suffering. So compassion isn't just like a warm feeling we have, like love, no, it actually has something to do with suffering and stepping into that place with others. And we've been using a physical object to name what that is. Don't put it up yet. To name what that can be. What is it? It's a compass. Yeah. Now you can put the picture up. It's in there. It's not in there? Dang. Okay, so it's not the northeast, southwest compass, but like the mathematical measuring compass. And as you consider those two words next to each other, they share an etymological root. They actually have very similar connected meaning. And so much like a compass, compassion is about honoring the relationship between 2 points. And I just love that. So between two people, between one group and another. So for October, again, we're just living into this image of the compass connection and this path of compassion that Jesus invites us into. And we've named that this path has kind of 3 movements to it. The compassionate way is the courage to see, the courage to feel, and the courage to act. And it does take courage. So this is the 3 movements we're working through. We've already walked through seeing with compassion, naming how if we're going to have courage to suffer with, we actually have to be close enough to see, right? To see the person, to see the suffering. So we named that first week how compassion happens in close proximity. Seeing that compass connection, getting close enough to honor that relationship that's there between me and you. Then last week we walked through feeling with compassion. The Greek word that is used in the Gospels to describe Jesus' emotions when he feels compassion. So the Greek word for compassion that's there in the Bible is this word. Splankna. Can you say it again? Splankna. And we talked last week about how splankna means what? Guts. I know, it sounds like that. Splankna. Like guts. Intestines, like literally this stuff down in here. So in that culture at that time, emotions were believed to be housed in your guts. And for us, today we talk about it being in our hearts. So it's moved up a little bit. So when Jesus feels compassion, the Greek word that's there is actually guts. He feels it in his guts. And so it is for us to do our own splankna-ing or to use our vernacular, to talk about feeling it in our hearts. We become brokenhearted in the midst of experiencing compassion. And so we explored then last week the barriers that come up for us in feeling compassion, because it ain't just like, it ain't easy. So today, now we turn to action. I'm just going to name that this series is really a challenging one, especially when we talk about actually taking action. But that's where we're headed. So acting with compassion, that's where we're headed. Y'all ready? Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to go anyway, even if you aren't ready. At least 2 of you are. Okay, so for our study of compassionate action, we're going to turn to one of the most well-known stories in our Christian tradition. It's Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. So So just to set the scene a little bit, Jesus is asked by a religion scholar the question first, like, what matters most? And then Jesus says, or asks back, and he responds, oh yeah, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so, and then he's trying to find a loophole. So he's like, well, what do you mean by a neighbor? Like, who is that exactly? And so this parable that Jesus offers us is the response to these questions. Just, that's where it lands. That's the context. And remember, as we've named, parables, they seem like very simple stories, but they actually are quite complex. There's many layers to them, and Jesus tosses them out as hooks to see who's going to grab hold of them. If the listener then is interested, wants to find out more, it leaves it up to the listener to decide what they want to do with it. So that's how we listen to it, with that kind of listening for hooks. Noticing also in this particular text how the compassionate way is articulated here, how we see, feel, act unfold. So invite Amanda, are you ready? There you are. Come on up and read for us. Microphone. It's like baton being passed right here. Just here it is.
That's what happens when you come late to church. Okay. Luke 10:30-37. Jesus answered by telling a story. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. But when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds, and then he lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins, gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I will pay you on my way back." What do you think? Which of these 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the religious scholar responded. Jesus said, "Go and do the same."
Thank you. A well-known story. It's interesting to always come at it at a different angle, because it always speaks different kinds of things to us. But the Good Samaritan, as we know, not only sees that an innocent traveler has been robbed and beaten up, he feels for him and he acts. It says in the text, when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. And he went on to bandage him and take him to the inn. There were 2 others on the same road who saw the man who had been robbed, and they, as it said, angled across to the other side. They avoided him. I'm going to go over here. First there was the priest, then there was another Levite religious leader. They saw the injured traveler. They may have even felt deeply or felt sorry for him, so they may have had that feeling also, but the problem was that they did not act, right? John Mayer has a song, it's called "Love is a Verb." Love ain't a thing, love is a verb. And it's true, thanks John Mayer, that love is a verb and compassion is a verb. So for us to talk about compassion, which we've defined as being with suffering, to suffer with, we can't skip over the seeing and the feeling, but at the same time, we can't stop there either. That compassion is a verb, not just a state of mind or a state of heart, but compassion leads us into action. But I want to be honest about how it just ain't easy to let compassion be a verb, to take action in response to the suffering that we see around us. And so as has become our practice just these last 2 weeks, we've really looked at why it's hard, like what the barriers are that get in the way. I did hear that they were going to play hide and seek up there too, so I think that's part of the which is awesome. Kind of wishing I was up there. No. So these past 2 weeks, we've really we've tried to name some of the barriers that get in the way, like why is it hard to see and to feel with compassion, and now we want to press into why it's hard to act compassionately and how we can reframe it to see it with fresh eyes that ground us in the Jesus story of compassion. Okay, so that's our approach. So I'm going to name just 2 challenges And yes, that get in the way of acting with compassion. So first I want to name really just like the bottom line challenge when it comes to compassionate action is that compassionate action is costly. It's costly. We see that in the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? So think about it with me. So in the parable, the Samaritan, what did compassion cost him? Time and money.
And his reputation.
His reputation, the like becoming, yeah, like he became ceremonially unclean just by being there. So it says 2 silver coins, so or more money too, if it ended up being more time that the man was there, just add it to my bill. He says, okay, we'll do that. But then also the time to stop and take care of him, put him on his donkey, take him to the inn, spend the night there with him, come back later to check on him. So where was the Samaritan going? We don't know. But like the whole like estimated time to your destination like got infinitely longer on his phone, right? Like I'm always watching how many minutes? Oh man, so that just got a lot longer for him. So a lot of time, money, reputation as well. So compassion is costly. It will deplete our resources every time. Whether that is time or money and or emotional resources too, right? Just the emotional drain of, physical drain too, of what it means to be in that space. So is that not why we so often, before we even get to action, we'll shut down our feelings of compassion, we'll keep that emotional distance, or even before that, we won't even actually get close enough to see, because we know that if we walk this path of compassion, one flows naturally into the other. If we allow ourselves to see someone and their suffering, well, we know what's coming next, and we're going to start feeling it. Oh, and then we open that river of compassionate feeling, we will more likely act. But the call to action is usually the sticking point for us, because action is costly. Not to mention, another reason, second reason I want to name, why we get stuck moving forward with action, acting compassionately, is that when we see the suffering around us, what do we often feel in light of all of what we see? Overwhelmed. There's just so much of it. It's overwhelming. Overwhelmed by the sheer amount of it as well as the messy complexity of it. Which makes me think of a time when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old. And I was in my kitchen with my dad, so my parents' house, because I'm 10 years old. And we're in there. My mom is finishing teaching piano lessons, which is what she did and still does. As she was doing that as I grew up. I have 2 brothers, but I think they were downstairs because they weren't in the kitchen. So we're in there, my dad and I, and we're getting things ready for dinner as my mom is doing that. So we're getting things ready to have hot dogs for dinner. So in the process of things, just the shuffle of things, the giant brand new bottle of Heinz ketchup, plastic bottle, it gets knocked off the counter and it falls to the floor. Things falling off the floor in the kitchen can be like no big deal most of the time, but not this time. So this bottle, and I don't understand the physics of it, it completely split open and exploded across the entirety of the kitchen. So my dad and me, ketchup. The ceiling, ketchup. The floor, obviously, ketchup, but the front of the refrigerator and the cabinets in the oven, ketchup. The underside of the counters, ketchup. The top side, again, I don't understand. The top side of the counters, ketchup. It just was all ketchup. And we just froze because obviously we're now standing in the middle of a crime scene, right? And so we just kind of, and then I think we just started laughing at all of the ketchup. But I just want you to picture this kitchen with me, in which, in this picture, most of the surfaces are white, mind you. So be there in that moment. And the ketchup, it's so much like the suffering that we see around us. That's how it can feel sometimes, right? It's overwhelming because there's so much chaos and messiness everywhere. So much of it doesn't make sense to us. How is that even happening? So after my dad, we had a good chuckle about it. And then I think we just kind of looked at each other holy crap, how do we even begin to clean this up, right? That's how we feel with compassionate action. We feel paralyzed by the suffering that we see and that we feel for. Where do we begin? How can this possibly ever get cleaned up? So we feel overwhelmed. So into all of this, I want to introduce you to, or maybe you already know, Aung San Suu Kyi. Picture. There. Aung San Suu Kyi was the winner of the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize. She's the leader of a nonviolent movement for democracy in Burma. And since 1962, again, you may already know this, but Burma has been governed by one of the most brutally repressive military regimes in the world. So Aung San Suu Kyi, often just referred to with affection by the Burmese people as Lady Sue, she's been described as Burma's Gandhi. For 25 years, she was in and out of house arrest as a political prisoner, but she became Myanmar's civilian leader since winning elections in 2010 and then in 2015. And even really recently, she's made headlines and received actually a lot of criticism in recent months with all that's been happening in Myanmar as she's tried to navigate the tenuous line of compassion as nearly 500,000 Muslims have been fleeing what some see as persecution there. So, like my parents' kitchen, when we find ourselves paralyzed by the sheer amount of mess and chaos that is within us and between us, the costliness and the complexity of not knowing how to act compassionately, Lady Sue's expert advice, which is forged through decades worth of tenuous, compassionate response, this is what she says. She says this: simply do something. Just start somewhere. Don't stand there despairing, but do something. How's that for a complicated word of advice from a well-learned, wise, experienced leader of compassion? So the courage to feel and to see, and yes, my friends, it takes courage. It takes courage to take in the messiness of the suffering in our lives and our neighborhoods and our schools and our political system and our world. It takes courage to roll up our sleeves and actually do something, especially when we know that it will cost us and that we may never get the whole mess cleaned up. Still, what is Lady Sue's advice? Do something, which absolutely echoes Jesus' parable, the Good Samaritan who chose to not pass by, to not move to the other side, but to see, to feel, and to act with compassion. It takes courage, and Jesus tells this story in response to the question of what matters most. Like, what's the bottom line? What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to love our neighbor. And this is what love looks like. Love is a verb. Do something. Start somewhere. And here's the thing. So Lady Sue explains how if we just start somewhere in our response of compassion action, before we know it, we find that we are beginning to make inroads into tidying up the mess. So just start somewhere. We may not know exactly how our action is going to play out. Lady Sue says, just continue. Later on, the fruits of what you do will become apparent on their own. And here's the curious, startling, amazing mystery behind doing something, taking action. It not only costs us, but it also fuels us. What? Like, how does that work? Lady Sue talks about how those who are doing something to improve the world are the ones who have hope for it. Those who do something are the ones who actually have hope. And those who aren't are people who don't have hope. And this is it. There is this direct relationship between hope and action. Hope, of course, is the very thing that can lead to action in the first place, right? Like, we hope for what's possible, therefore we step forward into this space. But then action, in turn, actually strengthens hope. When we act with compassion, even the simplest of compassionate deeds, it makes a difference. And we recognize that the unjust wrongs that create suffering in our world are not an indelible feature of reality. They can be changed. The mess can change. So last week we talked about compassion fatigue, how we can get just burned out from feeling, because there's so much to feel in the suffering that we see. Then this week, we're naming how this mess, it can just be costly, it can be overwhelming, you don't know what to do. But the other side of it is that doing something actually combats the despair and the exhaustion that we feel. Doing something is the very thing that builds and fuels hope and resilience in us and in the systems that we're trying to influence. Courage begets courage in us, in others. Action begets action in us and others, hope keeps fueling more action and courage, and yes, more hope. So when I hear all this from Lady Sue, and when I see this in the life of Jesus, for me, this is a huge aha. It's something that I need to hear, and maybe you do too, that this is an invitation into changing our mindset, to change how we see these moments when we're standing at an opportunity for compassionate action, when we have seen, we have felt, we're at this threshold that we could cross over. Will we do something? What can we do when we stand in the ketchup-covered kitchen? And the shift then is to see that the step that we take across that threshold, that it is a step that not only will cost us, but it will fuel us too. And not only will it fuel us, Jesus is so clear here that where he says, go and do the same. And in so many other places, it's this invitation to go and do the same. That this invitation into living compassionately is not just it's not just Jesus's program to make sure that people get the help that they need, right? That people who are hurting, that they would receive help. It is that. It actually absolutely accomplishes that. It isn't just about the receivers of compassion. But Jesus is also interested in the doers, those who live compassionately, that this is a path into living the best kind of life possible. A costly life, yes, but a life lived beyond ourselves, and a life that moves us into the full, abundant life that Jesus says that he came to make possible for us. So to hear in all of this, that mindset shift, that invitation to be changed, and how we see what it means to live compassionately, to change our understanding, that though it takes courage, but to see compassion, that it can lead us into action that fuels hope in us, that fuels hope in our world, that even in the midst of great suffering, that is possible. How desperately does this shift need to happen in our world? I know it needs to happen in me. So alongside all of this, hold it. Can you hold it with me? It's a lot. So holding that, I want to offer an image other than ketchup to kind of carry us through this for what we're describing here. It's a painting by Scott Erickson. Don't put it up yet. Okay, Rob's watching, okay. But so Scott Erickson, he posted this a few weeks ago on Instagram, is right as we began this series, and it just so struck me. But for folks who were here at Salt House back in the spring, during the season of Lent, we read a book together, devotionally, co-authored. So Scott Erickson is the artist of that book on prayer that we read together, so we got to engage with his artwork every day during our journey. He's an artist and speaker that's based out of Portland. So we created the art for the book, and then we had both the co-authors, Dustin McRoberts and Scott Erickson, here for a special evening last spring. But here's just another piece of his art that I want to offer to hold alongside compassion. All right, Rob, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. And this is it. How do you respond to that? So whatever's coming up for you, I want you to hear what Scott wrote about it. This is what he said. He said, "It's taken me half my life to understand that true transformation," he's talking about change here, "true transformation is connected to how we choose to see the world around us." How we choose to see the world around us. That this choice is where the divine is hiding out, waiting patiently to be found in the places we least expect. And what does he say? May I have eyes to see. So this picture, when I saw it, it just took my breath away because it visually captures how seeing with compassion can actually stir and ignite our hearts, our splankna, right? That somehow we need to connect, plug into that compass connection in order to become fully alive, fully ourselves, fully engaged. And I love how Scott names it as a choice, for it truly is. It's that shift, the choice to see with compassion that can fuel our hearts into the courage to feel and the courage to act. That as we are ignited by the fruits of our action, that hope is ignited too. Doesn't that just get you? I mean, this just gets me. Friends, in light of all of this, here's my invitation and challenge for us for this week as a way to walk this path and build our compassion muscles through practicing compassion together. As you're comfortable, I invite you to either close your eyes or just kind of keep your focus on the image on the screen. as we just kind of take a moment to reflect and listen. Really, we're holding that question, God, what are you saying? And as we hold that, I invite you to just tap into the people and places and communities that you have felt compassion for this week or recently. Just to pick one person, one situation, one relationship, one place that has stirred you, where there is suffering, where you want to feel hope and possibility, something close to you or on the other side of the world, a single individual or a whole country, your own child or partner, or someone you've never met. Little pro tip as we listen, from Houston to Puerto Rico to Syria to Las Vegas to the fires of California to our own families to the New Bethlehem Day Center serving families experiencing homelessness in our basement. There are ample places where suffering is happening. So just let one kind of sift through it all, let one rise to the surface. If you're feeling ambitious, you can pick 2 or 3, but just start with one. So as you hold that one, you're standing in the ketchup-splattered kitchen. So there's suffering, and the question is, what is the first small step or the next step that you can take to do something? To act with compassion this week. An intentional movement of being with suffering. In a relationship or situation that has stirred up your splanchna. So whether that means calling your representatives, donating money or time in a specific way, calling or writing or making a meal for someone that you're just thinking of, to offer child care and support for a friend who needs it, to give someone a ride, to lend someone your car, to show up at the New Bethlehem Day Center, to help here. We're going to do pumpkin decorating next week, hosting kids from the Day Center and our kids for a time together, to show up with more patience or more attention for your child, or someone you care for, or a friend who needs that kind of attention right now. Or to act in response to all these things that are making headlines, including our LGBT and immigrant friends whose rights are just dwindling in light of our current administration. What would that action be this week? It can feel like a big mess, and we stand there, we want to fix it, but the first step is just start by doing something for an actual person or situation. And yes, it will cost you. At the very least, it will cost you some time this week. And also, at the very least, it will fuel you for more and plug you into this life that Jesus invites us to embody when he says, go and do the same. As you settle into this person, this place, as well as a way to respond with compassion, I invite you to also take time while you're here during communion or after worship to visit that Kairos wall over there, to write it down, a little word about what it is, who it is that's on your heart, what's stirring you. For this is Kairos that we're experiencing. We're experiencing an invitation from God, stopping to ask, God, what are you saying? What am I going to do about it? We're living into this in a very specific, practical way. So offer it up to the wall as you are able, just to write down those things, that Kairos. Also, as a way to respond, we're going to take a moment after we sing to actually open some space up to pray and to speak those places, those things that are stirring us out loud, to pray together. A final word from Lady Sue. Lady Sue, whenever she interviews, when interviewers try to inflate her significance or focus solely on her work for change, her response is to emphasize that no single one of us is all important. No single one of us is all important, but each one of us, she says, is essential. Each one of us is essential. In this movement of change in our world, as well as metanoia, change in us, each of us is essential on this path and work of compassion. The question is, do you believe this? We may not all be called into the world stage of political action like Lady Sue, but each one of us has a critical role to play in our families, in our personal relationships, our workplaces, our communities. No one else can play that role of compassion for you. Do you know this? That each one of us is essential? Let's hold that question and let's pray. God, we take a deep breath, breathing in your spirit and your promise that you are here. We thank you for your grace that is sustaining us always. What a gift.